In the midst of a raging storm on a quiet Oregon backroad, single mom Grace Holloway makes a split-second decision that will alter the course of her life. She pulls over to help a bleeding, unconscious man sprawled by the woods. He says his name is John, no ID, no phone, just haunted eyes and a body full of secrets. Grace offers him shelter, unaware that she's just taken in Jonathan Raines, tech billionaire and creator of a world-changing AI, now running for his life after surviving a brutal assassination attempt. As Grace struggles to protect her son, Eli, she uncovers the explosive truth. John is being hunted by a covert alliance of powerful elites, terrified of what his AI can expose: corruption, surveillance, and murder at the highest levels. With mercenaries closing in and betrayal around every corner, Grace and John form an uneasy alliance, one born of survival, loyalty, and an unexpected spark. What begins as an act of compassion spirals into a high-stakes war for truth, forcing a mother, a child, and a broken genius to fight for more than just their lives. They are fighting to bring down a shadow empire. Some shelters protect you, others start a revolution. The sky was the color of bruises. Thick, purple clouds crawled across the mountains, swallowing the last traces of light from the overcast sky. A cold wind lashed the windows of the Holloway house, sending the porch chimes into a frantic, metallic symphony. Grace Holloway stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, her eyes flickering between the sink and the television flickering on the counter. The local weatherman looked like a cartoon under the green screen radar map. His voice was calm, but his words weren't. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Heavy rainfall expected by nightfall. Stay indoors and avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. Grace sighed and dried her hands on a dish towel. Storms like these weren't unusual for the Oregon highlands in spring, but something about this one felt different, heavier, like it was dragging something more than just wind and water behind it. "Mom, is it going to flood again?" Eli's voice came from the doorway, thin and laced with worry. He was 8, pale-faced with messy brown hair and a ragged stuffed bear under one arm. His blue eyes were wide behind smudged glasses. "Not this time, sweetie," she said, giving him a reassuring smile she didn't quite feel. "We're uphill. The creek's not going to touch us." Eli nodded but didn't move. His bear's ear twisted in his small hands. Grace walked over, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Why don't you grab the flashlight from your nightstand, in case the power goes out?" Eli hesitated, then nodded and padded away. Grace turned back toward the window, trees bent in the wind, whispering secrets only the forest understood. Her house, an aging 2-story structure left to her by her grandmother, groaned under the storm's breath. She checked the back door, locked the windows again. Old habits. She'd gotten good at being paranoid after her ex left. Being a single mom in a small town meant always being one step ahead of chaos, and storms didn't frighten her nearly as much as the silence that followed them. She was about to close the front blinds when a sudden motion caught her eye, a flash of movement along the tree line. At first, she thought it was a deer, but then she saw the staggering shape, dark and hunched, stumbling out of the woods and collapsing onto the gravel road in front of her house. Her heart dropped into her stomach. "Oh my God!" Without thinking, she grabbed her raincoat from the wall and shoved her feet into boots. She yanked open the door, the wind slamming it wide like it had been waiting. Rain punched down in fat, cold drops. She dashed through it, squinting against the dark. The man was face down, his clothes soaked and torn. Mud clung to him like a second skin. She crouched, fingers searching for a pulse. Alive, weak but steady. "Sir," she called over the wind, "can you hear me?" He groaned, but didn't answer. Grace looked around. No headlights, no other cars. Just this stranger bleeding on her road, like the storm had spit him out. Against every instinct screaming caution, she slipped her arms under his shoulder and heaved. He was heavy, dead weight, but she managed to drag him to her truck. Rain sluiced down her back, and she cursed under her breath as she maneuvered his limp body into the passenger seat. Once inside, she cranked the engine and blasted the heat. He shivered violently, half-conscious, muttering nonsense between clenched teeth. His face was bruised, his lip split. A jagged cut ran along his temple. "Jesus, what happened to you?" she whispered. He flinched at her voice and tried to speak, but his words tangled into incoherence. "I'm taking you to the house," she said firmly. "You need help, and the ER's too far in this weather." He tried to protest with a weak shake of his head, but Grace was already steering the truck down her driveway. By the time she got him inside and onto the couch, her hands were shaking, not from fear, but adrenaline. She grabbed her first aid kit and a wet towel. Eli appeared at the top of the stairs, his flashlight in hand. "Mom, who's that?" Grace met his eyes, her voice steady but soft. "He's hurt. I'm helping him." Eli hugged his bear tighter. "Is he a bad guy?" "I don't know," she said honestly, kneeling beside the stranger. "But we're not leaving him out there to die." The wind howled through the eaves, and for a moment it sounded like laughter. Outside, the storm rolled in, and so did fate. The fire crackled in the old stone hearth as Grace pulled the man's soaked jacket from his shoulders. Underneath was a bloodied white shirt, the fabric ripped across his ribs. She worked methodically, cutting away fabric, cleaning wounds, checking for broken bones. Her hands moved with calm precision, the way they had when Eli had fallen from the treehouse or when her father had sliced his palm with an axe. But this was different. This wasn't someone she knew, and the bruises weren't from an accident. They were deliberate, the kind you get when someone means to hurt you. The man stirred again, eyes fluttering open for a moment, hazel eyes, sharp, alert, and filled with a fear that made her stomach twist. "Where am I?" he rasped. "You're safe," Grace replied. "You collapsed in front of my house. I brought you in. You're hurt, probably a concussion. Who did this to you?" He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes scanned the room, looking for exits, threats, weapons. It was the look of a soldier, not a victim. "You need a doctor," she added. "No," he said, hoarse but firm. "No hospitals, no cops." Grace frowned. "You've been beaten, maybe worse. Whoever did this might still be—" "No cops," he repeated, struggling to sit up. Grace stood her ground. "Then you need to tell me who you are and why I shouldn't be terrified that I just brought a fugitive into my home." The man hesitated, then barely audible. "Name's John." She waited for more. There was none. "Okay, John," she said slowly. "You're bleeding, concussed, and shaking like a leaf. If you want to stay here, fine. But if you become a danger to me or my son, I will not hesitate to protect him. Do you understand?" He nodded, eyes finally meeting hers with something close to respect. "Good," she said, stepping back. Now lie down before you pass out again." He didn't protest this time. As she threw a blanket over him, Eli peeked down from the stairs again, his stuffed bear clutched in his arms. Grace whispered, "Back to bed, sweetheart, it's going to be okay." But as she sat on the edge of the armchair, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall, she wasn't so sure. Morning came with gray skies and the scent of wet pine outside the window. Grace hadn't slept. She'd taken the armchair by the fireplace, dozing in fits and starts, her mind on high alert. John, or whatever his name really was, remained unconscious, but his breathing had steadied. She watched him in the dim light. He looked younger now, without the blood and dirt, early 30s, lean, but with the hardened muscles of someone used to surviving on the run. As the kettle whistled in the kitchen, Grace poured herself a mug of coffee and stared at her old laptop. Curiosity gnawed at her. Who was this man, really? She opened her browser and searched local news. Missing persons, road accidents, assaults. Nothing. Then she widened her scope. That's when she found the article. Jonathan Raines missing after explosion at Global AI Summit. She clicked it. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. The same angular jaw, the same haunted eyes. Jonathan Raines, CEO of Helix Systems, billionaire, tech visionary, now presumed dead after a terrorist bombing in Dubai. Grace's breath caught. Billionaire, tech summit, assassination. Her eyes darted to the couch. He shifted in his sleep. No way this was a coincidence. Just then the power flickered. The lights dimmed. The screen went black. Grace cursed and slammed the laptop shut. The timing wasn't lost on her. When she turned around, John was awake and staring right at her. "You found me, didn't you?" She nodded slowly. "So you are him." He exhaled, defeated. "I didn't mean to drag anyone else into this. I didn't have anywhere else to go." "You should have gone to the police." "I can't. They're part of it. They tried to kill me." Grace's stomach tightened. "Who?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Everyone." John sat up slowly, wincing as the pain flared in his side. Grace offered him a mug of coffee, and for a moment they sat in silence. The storm finally reduced to a soft drizzle against the windows. "I developed an AI," he began, his voice low, like he wasn't sure he should be telling her anything. Not just a smart assistant, something bigger, smarter. A machine that could identify lies, corruption, crimes buried in data, all the things humans hide. Grace sipped her coffee, wary but intrigued. "You're saying your own creation made you a target?" "It didn't just expose secrets. It found a web of them. Military contracts, offshore deals, assassinations passed off as accidents. When I tried to go public, someone blew up the summit." Grace's eyes narrowed. "You survived that?" "Barely, and I've been running ever since." He pulled a small chip from his jacket pocket, a thumb-sized drive wrapped in gauze. "Everything's on here, but if I upload it, they'll come after anyone near me. They already are." As if on cue, a quiet buzz came from her Wi-Fi router. She turned to look. Static blinked across the TV screen, then a symbol appeared. A red triangle with a slash. "Is that them?" she asked. "They found me," John whispered. "I led them here." Grace looked out the window at the tree line. The silence outside wasn't peaceful anymore. I watched it. She turned back to him, voice steady. "Then we fight." Outside, the storm had passed, but the tension hadn't. The forest surrounding Grace's property stood like a wall of secrets, each tree a sentinel. The air was sharp, tinged with petrichor and the remnants of fear. Grace checked every window again, locked, curtains drawn, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind brushing the house made her heart leap. John sat at the kitchen table, pale but focused. He was typing commands into her ancient laptop like it was second nature. Despite his injuries, his fingers danced with precision, each keystroke confident, exact. "I need to know if we're being watched," he said without looking up. "I thought you said they found you." "They did. But I need to know how, and if it's just me or you too." Grace leaned against the counter, arms folded. "I don't have anything to hide." "You do now," he replied grimly. Lines of code filled the screen as John bypassed her firewall and ran diagnostics. Her router lights flickered in a pattern that made no sense, except to him. "There's a tracking protocol piggybacking off your Wi-Fi signal. Low power, passive scan, military-grade surveillance software. Someone activated this within the last 2 hours. Grace felt ice in her chest. "From where?" John pointed to the window. "Somewhere out there, within 500 feet. Grace grabbed her father's old hunting rifle from the hallway. She'd never used it on anything but coyotes, but the cold steel now gave her comfort. She scanned the tree line with practiced eyes. Nothing, but that didn't mean they weren't there. "Infrared drones," John said. "Smaller than a basketball. Quiet, night adaptive." "You're saying they were watching us while we slept?" He nodded, and then, as if summoned by fear itself, the router lights blinked rapidly. John's screen filled with a new window, a live connection trying to handshake. "They're trying to open a voice channel." "Why?" "To intimidate me," he said, deadpan. "They want me to know they're close." He clicked accept. A distorted voice crackled through the laptop speakers. "You're not alone anymore, Jonathan. We warned you. Now she pays." Grace's blood turned to ice. John closed the connection and shut the laptop. "They know about you," he said, "which means it's no longer just my problem. You're part of this now." Grace looked out the window back toward the woods. Then she locked the front door and whispered, "Then let's make them regret it." That night, Grace made John sleep in the guest room. Not out of mistrust. She didn't trust anyone at this point, but because Eli had started having nightmares again. The boy had crawled into her bed somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m., tears drying on his cheeks. "You were yelling again," Eli mumbled, "about the forest." Grace didn't answer. She rubbed his back until his breathing evened out. In the morning, she found John sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog burn off the trees. His face was pale, lips tight. But there was something else now. Resolve. "I want to tell you something," he said, "about why I made the AI." Grace sat beside him with 2 cups of coffee. "I'm listening." "I had a brother," he began. "Sam, 2 years younger, smart, idealist. He joined a cybersecurity watchdog group after college. They exposed a major surveillance deal between the government and a telecom giant." Grace sipped her coffee. "Let me guess. They got silenced." "Sam was killed in a fake car accident, brake failure, no witnesses, no investigation." Grace's stomach twisted. "I built the AI to find out what really happened. It didn't just find Sam's killer, it found dozens, journalists, whistleblowers, scientists, all gone. hidden in metadata, corporate logs, burner accounts. The deeper I went, the darker it got. He looked at her then, eyes hollow. The day I decided to leak it, the day of the summit, that was the day they tried to erase me, too. Grace studied him for a long moment. So this thing you built, this AI, it's more than just code, it's justice. John nodded. And that's why they'll do anything to stop it. Grace reached over, touched his hand. Then we make sure they can't. By afternoon, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. Grace had taken Eli to the local library under the pretense of needing some quiet time for homeschooling. She didn't tell him about the drones or the men who might be watching their house. Not yet. John used the time to set up a secure workspace. He took over Grace's shed, lined it with aluminum foil, blacked out the windows, and rigged an off-grid power source from salvaged car batteries. "This is your war room now?" Grace asked as she returned with Eli napping in the truck. "Close," John replied. "It's where we'll find the leak." He plugged the chip into his shielded terminal. Data cascaded across the monitor, logs, files, video clips, encrypted strings. One folder blinked. Red Phoenix, undelivered payload. Inside was an image, grainy surveillance footage of a private meeting between 4 men in suits. One of them, U.S. Senator Carlton Voss, a war hawk known for pushing for increased surveillance laws. Another man, General Rhodes of the Defense Cyber Command. "What the hell is this?" Grace asked. John enlarged the image. "This is my insurance. Proof that the assassination wasn't random, it was orchestrated." Then he paused, zooming in on the corner. There, nearly hidden in shadow, was a 5th figure, not in a suit, wearing tactical gear, watching. John's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's Marcus Steele." "Who?" Grace asked. "The one who ordered the hit." Grace's pulse quickened. "How do you know?" John stared at the screen. "Because I trained him." Grace didn't know what she expected to hear after "I trained him." Maybe that it was a joke, a lie, something from a paranoid fever dream. But John's expression didn't waver. There was no flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, only the cold weight of memory. "You trained him?" she asked. John nodded slowly. "Back when I worked under the government's cyber ops program, I wasn't always a CEO. He moved across the shed, pulling out a waterproof case. From it, he retrieved a tablet, encrypted, military grade. He thumbed a hidden switch and let the holographic display flicker to life. An array of faces appeared. One of them highlighted in red. Steele, Marcus, Black Asset Designate. Marcus Steele was one of the elite, John explained. "We recruited him after he left Delta Force. Brilliant operator, quiet, efficient, scared the hell out of everyone. But he believed in structure, orders, until he didn't." "What happened?" "He disappeared from the network, wiped himself clean. Showed up a year later working for private black ops firms, ones with no accountability. I think he was hired by someone inside Helix Systems, someone who wanted my AI shut down permanently." Grace looked at the display. Steele's image was nondescript, buzz-cut, square jaw, blank expression, the kind of face you forget at a crowd's edge until it's too late. "Why would someone from your own company want you dead?" John hesitated. "Because what I built, it doesn't just expose criminals. It exposes anyone, including the people funding Helix Systems." He tapped another screen, revealing financial records, a tangled web of transactions, shell companies, and offshore accounts, all traced back to the same names in the surveillance footage. Voss Rhodes, and a third, Monica Trask, Helix board chair. Trask, John muttered, signed off on all my development contracts. She's also a former CIA liaison. She's playing both sides. Grace felt the air thicken. So what now? She asked. We don't run, he said, standing straighter. We burn this whole thing open. He looked at her, a flicker of defiance in his tired eyes. I need your help. Grace nodded without hesitation. I'm in. That night, Grace locked every door twice. Eli slept soundly, curled under 2 blankets and dreaming of simpler things, things that didn't involve espionage, encrypted drives, or killers in the woods. Grace, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. Neither could John. He sat in the shed, watching the data cycle through encrypted tunnels he'd built. Each ping a pulse, each silence is a danger. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the first anomaly hit, a ghost signal, unusual, low latency, mimicking his own system's heartbeat. Someone was mimicking his encryption keys. His blood ran cold. They've cracked one of the masks, he muttered. He opened the terminal and watched a slow crawl of his system's internal IP structure unraveling in real time. From the house, Grace appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. I heard something outside. John didn't look up. They're here. She didn't ask who. Outside, the forest had gone quiet. No wind, no animal sounds. Just that eerie stillness predators bring. They moved quickly. Grace went to wake Eli and bundle him in the truck. John yanked the server's power supply and grabbed the chip. Then he heard it, a faint thrum, like a mosquito, but mechanical. A drone zipped past the window, scanning the shed with infrared. He slammed the door and threw a blanket over the window. We're compromised. Grace met him at the truck. Eli was groggy, frightened, but obeying. John tossed the chip into a Faraday pouch and climbed into the back seat. As they pulled down the gravel driveway, a second drone rose above the trees, lights flashing red. Then from the edge of the forest, headlights. An SUV, blacked out, bulletproof. Floor it, John shouted. Grace gunned it. Behind them, the drone began recording. The SUV revved. And in that moment, Grace realized something. She wasn't just a mom anymore. She was a target. They drove for 2 hours before stopping. Forest turned to open fields, fields to logging roads, and finally to an old ranger station, long since abandoned. John guided her off the trail into a thicket of trees where they parked and killed the engine. For a while, they just sat in the dark, listening. Eli had fallen asleep again, wrapped in a blanket, clutching his bear. Grace rubbed her face, trying to keep from shaking. I need to know something, she said finally. Are we going to survive this? John was quiet for a long time. I don't know. She laughed bitterly. Not the answer I was hoping for. John turned toward her. You didn't have to help me. You could have left me in the road. I thought you were a stranger, she said. Now I know you're worse. You're a high-value target with enemies who don't care about collateral damage. He didn't argue. Then why did you help me? He asked. Grace looked at Eli, peaceful in sleep. Because I know what it's like to be left behind, she said, and I know how to fight when no one else will. John stared at her with something close to awe. We need to keep moving, he said finally. I can wipe the trackers, but it'll buy us hours at most." "What happens after that?" John looked out the window. "We find allies, or we become ghosts." Grace gripped the wheel again. "Then it's time to haunt some bastards." By dawn, they were deep in the Blue Mountains, tucked away in a derelict ranger watchtower that hadn't been used in decades. Grace steered the truck up the narrow dirt road while John scanned radio frequencies from the passenger seat. Eli sat in the back, quietly playing with his stuffed bear, but his eyes watched everything. They were all learning to be quiet. Inside the watchtower, dust coated everything like a memory. Grace found old ranger uniforms in a trunk, a rusted compass, and an outdated survival map. She shook her head at the strangeness of it all. Just a week ago, her biggest concern had been late rent. Now she was playing hide-and-seek with assassins. John booted up his gear using solar chargers and batteries he'd salvaged from a nearby radio tower. Despite the chaos, there was a flicker of purpose in him again. He was in his element. Grace watched him work. "You've always been this paranoid?" she asked lightly. John smirked without looking up. "Not paranoid. Just proven right too many times." Eli, curious, stepped closer. "What are you doing?" John tapped a few keys, bringing up a simulation. "I'm teaching your Wi-Fi how to lie." Grace raised an eyebrow. "If they scan us," John explained, "I want them to think we're a logging crew in Montana, not fugitives hiding in Oregon." Eli's eyes lit up. "Can I learn?" John paused. Then, with surprising gentleness, he turned the screen toward the boy. "You want to know how to trick a satellite?" The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange rhythm. Grace cleaned, Eli learned encryption, and John wrote lines of code that danced like lightning across the screen. It felt almost normal, but nothing was ever truly normal anymore. That night, Grace stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the stars, bright, cold, endless. John joined her, silent for a long moment before he said, "You saved my life. Again." She looked at him, studying the lines of worry etched into his face. "I didn't do it for you," she said softly. "I did it because Eli deserves to live in a world where truth means something." John nodded, eyes unreadable. "Then let's make it one." The next morning brought wind and frost, a cruel reminder that the mountains didn't forgive easily. Grace bundled Eli in layers and gave him her old thermos before heading back inside. John had transformed the ranger tower into a digital bunker. He pulled her aside as she entered. "I found something," he said. "Someone tried to spoof my AI's backup routines." Meaning someone has a copy, or part of one, and they're running it in a shadow server. Grace felt her stomach turn. "Can it be weaponized?" He hesitated. "In the wrong hands?" "Yes, my AI was built to interpret truth, but if someone tweaks it, it could be used to control narrative instead." He typed in a command, and a 3D map projected into the air. Locations across the world with spikes in activity: Geneva, D.C., Singapore, and Portland. "Why there?" "There's a Helix satellite node just outside the city. If they're running a ghost instance of my AI, it's probably anchored to that server." Grace looked out the window at the forest. "So we go there." John met her gaze. "We go there." They left that night. John disabled every trace of their trail, scrubbed the logs, looped their cell data, rerouted heat signatures through a hacked drone. Grace drove in silence, her hands tight on the wheel. It wasn't fear that gripped her, it was urgency. If someone was corrupting John's AI, they weren't just after secrets. They wanted control, and control without truth was tyranny. Eli dozed in the back, unaware of the war his mother had decided to join. They reached Portland by dawn, blending into early commuter traffic. John had arranged a contact, a tech activist named Nova, who worked out of a co-op disguised as an antique bookstore. The sign read, "Yesterday's Tomorrows." Grace parked 2 blocks away. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "She's the one who helped build the original framework," John said. "If anyone can help us get ahead of this, it's Nova." Inside, the bookstore was dimly lit, all cedar shelves and dust motes. An old record played from a player in the corner. A woman in her 30s with dreadlocks and holographic earrings raised an eyebrow as they approached. "Rains," she said. "Thought you were dead." "Not yet." She looked at Grace, then Eli. "Friends." "Family," John replied. Nova nodded once and led them to a hidden basement. There, under antique carpets and false walls, was a setup worthy of the NSA. 6 monitors, AI cluster nodes, military routers, and a secure LAN built on quantum key distribution. "I've been tracking your ghost," Nova said, pulling up files. "It's growing, learning, which means someone's feeding it." John clenched his jaw. "Can you isolate it?" "I can try," Nova said. "But there's a problem." She pointed to a real-time feed. "They know you're coming." On the screen, a black SUV pulling up outside the building. Grace's breath caught. "They found us," she whispered. John grabbed the chip and stuffed it into a Faraday bag. "We've got 15 seconds, he said. "Move." The bookstore erupted in chaos. Grace grabbed Eli, clutching him tight, as John pulled a duffel bag from beneath Nova's desk. Inside, EMP grenades, burner phones, and a compact submachine pistol. Nova tossed John a pair of blackout goggles and grabbed her own gear without a word. This wasn't her first breach. "They're entering through the alley," Nova hissed. 2-man advance team, suppressors, government issue. John nodded. Steele's signature. They moved quickly. Nova yanked back a hidden bookcase, revealing a fire escape that led to the roof. Grace hoisted Eli up the narrow ladder, whispering calming words as the boy clung to her. His bear bounced against her hip with each rung. John and Nova stayed behind, setting the EMPs on timers. Grace looked back just in time to see the door blow open downstairs. Shadows poured in, black-clad and silent. Then, whump! A pulse detonated, the lights stuttered, and the building went dark. On the roof, the sky cracked open with rain, cold, sharp, relentless. The city below shimmered with indifference, unaware of the war playing out above it. They fled across the rooftops. Grace didn't look back until they were 6 blocks away, crouched beneath an overpass. John finally caught up, face flushed, chest heaving. "They weren't just mercs," he said. "One of them was the CIA." Nova looked stunned. "Active? Worse, off books." "Steele," Grace muttered. John nodded grimly. "He's moved beyond surveillance. This was an extraction." "Of you?" John shook his head. "Of the AI." They regrouped in a storm drain beneath the city, a tight, damp tunnel reeking of mold and iron. Nova's hideout had been torched, their digital signature compromised. Everything that tied them to the old network was now a liability. John spread out a makeshift map marking 3 locations: the Helix satellite node, a backup server farm outside Spokane, and a data laundering site hidden beneath a private tech campus in Seattle. "This is their triangle," he said, "each point feeding the ghost instance. We shut down one node, the others compensate. But if we hit all 3 in sequence, we crash it," Nova finished. Grace leaned against the tunnel wall, exhaustion etched into her features. "How? You said they're military protected." John handed her a flash drive. "With this." "What is it?" "A worm. I call it Echo. It mimics the ghost's neural signature, then corrupts it from the inside. But it has to be injected from within the servers. No remote uploads, physical access only." Nova snorted. "So we're talking 3 covert ops, with a kid in tow." Grace raised her eyes. "We're not leaving Eli, and we're not backing down." John gave her a look of admiration. "Then we divide and conquer." He assigned Nova to Spokane, himself to Seattle, and Grace, armed with Eli, a disguise kit, and Echo, to Portland's Helix node, the most dangerous location, the one Steele would expect him to hit. Grace stared at the map. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "I trust you," John said, "more than anyone." Her grip tightened on the flash drive. "Then let's make it count." The Portland Helix satellite node was nestled beneath an office park, masquerading as a digital innovation lab. Its security was designed for intellectual property theft, not espionage. Laser tripwires, face recognition, temperature-mapped walkways. Grace and Eli entered through the front lobby wearing stolen ID badges. Grace's hair was dyed a darker brown, and Eli wore mirrored sunglasses and a hoodie several sizes too big. They looked like a tired tech mom and her son on a bring-your-kid-to-work day. Inside, white walls gleamed under artificial sunlight, sleek, cold, sterile. Eli whispered, "This place feels like a spaceship." Grace smiled faintly. "Good. Spaceships don't ask questions." They rode the elevator down to sub-level 3, where biometric locks scanned Grace's forged retina signature. For a moment the system hesitated. Then the door clicked open. She exhaled. "Come on, sweetheart." Inside, the core of the node hummed, a vault of servers stretching floor to ceiling, each one blinking with silent menace. At the far end was a port access terminal. She inserted the Echo drive. The system came alive. Lines of code scrolled. The worm began weaving itself into the ghost instance, and then the screen went black. A voice behind her said, "You made it farther than I expected." She turned slowly. Marcus Steele, calm, smiling, gun drawn. Grace instinctively pushed Eli behind her. "I didn't want the boy involved," Steele said, "but you've made this complicated." Grace raised her chin. "You kill me. John finishes the job." Steele cocked his head. "You think he's not already dead?" Her heart lurched. "Lie," she whispered. Steele smirked. "The AI doesn't care who wins, Grace. It only cares that someone controls the narrative." He stepped forward. And that's when Eli shouted, "Now, Mom!" Grace dove left, slamming a panic button on her phone. The Echo drive activated a pulse protocol. Every screen in the room flashed, and the lights flickered. Steele fired, missed. She grabbed Eli and ran for the emergency exit. Behind her, the node erupted in chaos, and Echo went live. The air tore around them like knives as Grace and Eli burst into the night. Behind them, alarms screamed from the Helix node. Security lights flickered, bathing the parking lot in strobe-like pulses. Grace's boots slammed against pavement, arms wrapped around Eli as they dove behind a delivery van. Then came the crunch of boots. Steele's team was already outside. Grace's instincts kicked in. She threw open the van's back doors and shoved Eli inside. "Stay low, no matter what." He nodded, wide-eyed but brave. Grace slammed the doors and sprinted across the lot, drawing attention. Gunfire cracked through the night, controlled bursts, precise. She ducked behind a dumpster, breath ragged. Steele's voice echoed over a handheld speaker. "There's nowhere to go, Grace. You were brave, but it ends now." She scanned the perimeter. A chain-link fence. Beyond it, forest, shadows, terrain she could use. She made a break for it. The fence loomed. She leapt, boots hitting metal, fingers curling into links. A shot grazed the wire near her head, sending sparks flying. She vaulted over and hit the ground rolling. Then darkness. Trees swallowed her whole. The forest was wet, alive, murmuring secrets. She moved fast and low, hearing the men behind her. Tactical boots, heavy breathing. One of them muttered something about infrared being scrambled. John's worm is still doing its job, she realized. She crouched behind a moss-covered log, lungs burning. A twig snapped too close. Then, snap! A figure stepped forward, rifle raised. Grace kicked his knee out from under him, grabbed the rifle, and clocked him with the butt. He dropped without a sound. Another emerged. She fired instinctively, 2 rounds into his vest. He dropped, winded. Then a voice. Eli. Screaming. She turned and ran. Eli had left the van, drawn by the noise. Steele stood over him, gun pointed, one eyebrow raised in amusement. "You trained him well," Steele said coldly. Grace leveled the rifle. "Let him go." Steele's smile vanished. "I trained better." Before he could shoot, a blur tackled him from the side. John, bloody, alive, furious. The 2 men crashed to the ground in a brutal tangle of fists and fury. Grace snatched Eli, shielding him as the 2 fought. Fists thudded against flesh, boots slammed into ribs. Steele drew a knife. John blocked the stab with his forearm, then disarmed Steele and drove the blade into the ground beside his head. "Next time," John whispered, "I don't miss." Steele lay still, winded but alive. John turned to Grace, panting. "You owe me one." They left Steele bound to a tree with zip ties and a GPS ping on his location. John had no illusions. Someone would find him, and probably soon. But now they had something more valuable. Grace carried Eli, who had finally succumbed to sleep, while John opened Steele's confiscated tablet. A small retinal scanner blinked on its screen. Grace frowned. "That won't work without—" John pulled a contact lens from his pocket and placed it over the scanner. The tablet unlocked. "I prepped for this," he said grimly. Inside the tablet were encrypted kill orders, communications logs, and a series of access nodes, like spiderwebs linking names to directives. Each order had a codename: Ravenlock, Sundiver, Fallout Throne. One was labeled Halo Burn, and under it, target Jonathan Rains. Status: active, contingency, extend to secondary nodes and immediate witnesses. Grace read the next line. Secondary node, G. Holloway/E. Holloway. Her breath caught. "They made me a target," she whispered. "My son, too." John's jaw clenched. They were planning to clean the house. Anyone who touched me. He tapped deeper into the logs and pulled up an AI simulation, a ghost version of his own project, Taurus, but corrupted, where his AI searched for justice. This version mapped threats and recommended preemptive removals. "It's a weapon," Nova said, appearing on the group call via satellite relay. "They've turned it into a strategic assassination planner. It evaluates truth and erases it." John looked at Grace. "We can't just crash it anymore," he said. "We have to expose it, show the world what they tried to do." Nova nodded. "You need a live feed to a decentralized mesh. Can you make it to the data vault?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "What's the data vault?" John gave a grim smile. "Where the truth gets buried." They traveled northeast in silence, crossing into Washington state by dawn. The roads were empty, the sky a blank sheet of steel. Eli slept in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, snoring softly. Grace drove while John reviewed the tablet, piecing together a trail of betrayal. He'd once trusted his board. He'd trusted his military peers. He'd even believed the government would protect the technology if it went wrong. But now? "All of them," he muttered. "They sold the AI before the ink dried." Grace glanced at him. "So what's the plan now?" John stared out the window. "We go to the vault. We release the data to everyone, at once. Not a leak, not a press conference, a detonation." Grace nodded. "Broadcast the infection." "Exactly, but we'll need help." That's when Nova's voice crackled through the comm unit. "Then it's a good thing I called in some favors." 2 vehicles intercepted them outside a small town, a modified Jeep and a delivery truck. Inside were Nova's old activist team, hacktivists, engineers, and one ex-journalist with a satellite dish strapped to her back. "This," Nova said over the feed, "is your truth bomb squad." John stepped forward, eyes flaring with purpose. "Then let's light the fuse." The convoy reached the outskirts of Chelan just after sundown. Tucked behind a decommissioned power station was their destination, an old fire command bunker now used by climate researchers. Or at least, it used to be. Now it was Nova's new base of operations. Grace parked the truck while Eli stirred, rubbing his eyes. Nova stepped out of the shadows and gave a short nod. "Final vaults deep underground," she said. "No satellite line of sight. Clean. Untouched." John surveyed the entrance. Reinforced steel door, biometric lock, no network activity unless manually enabled. "It's perfect," he said. Inside, the safe house was cold and dimly lit. Grace set up a sleeping area for Eli in a small side room, while the others unpacked satellite routers, secure comms, and backup drives. John hunched over the command console, readied the final payload, the unredacted data, every kill order, surveillance document, and ghost AI simulation that could prove the conspiracy. Nova typed rapidly beside him. "We have a 6-minute window before the mesh networks trace us. That's all we get." Then the lights cut out. Total darkness. For one long second, no one moved. Then a flash. A concussion grenade exploded in the hallway. Screams, shouts, gunfire. The ambush had begun. Grace pulled Eli against the wall, shielding his body with hers. John drew his pistol and returned fire towards the stairwell. 2 intruders, black gear, no insignia, rushed the room. Nova threw her laptop at one, ducked behind the server rack, and launched a signal flare into the ventilation shaft. The room was filled with red light and smoke. Grace grabbed a utility knife from her belt and slashed one attacker's forearm as he reached for Eli. The man screamed. She drove her knee into his gut and grabbed his rifle. Another figure emerged behind her, weapon raised. Crack! A shot rang out. He dropped. John stood behind her, blood on his shirt, eyes blazing. "We need to finish the upload, now." They dashed into the server chamber. Nova jammed the vault door shut. John inserted the chip and activated the worm. A timer began. 00600. "Once this goes live," he warned, "there's no taking it back." Grace looked down at Eli, who gripped her hand. "Good," she whispered. "Let them all burn." The upload timer ticked down as chaos raged outside the vault. 000512. Grace watched the door vibrate with each impact as Steele's team attempted to breach it. Sparks showered from the top hinge. Any second now it would give. "Buy me time," John said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "I need to layer the files with real-time verification protocols. If we just dump them raw, they'll be called fakes before they go viral." Nova held up a tablet. "We've got partial mesh, it's unstable." "Send anyway." Grace turned to John. "There's another way." He looked up. "I'm going out there," she said. "Offer a trade." John frowned. "You'd never make it back in." "Maybe not, but it'll distract them." Nova shook her head. "They'll shoot you on sight." "No," Grace said. "Not if I tell them I have the AI chip. They still think I'm just a mother, and that makes me the best lie they'll believe." John stared at her. Every line of him said don't. But he saw it in her eyes. She wasn't asking permission. She was already gone. Outside, smoke curled along the corridor as the vault door hissed open just enough for Grace to step through. She walked forward, arms raised, a data drive clutched in her hand. Steele emerged from the smoke, bloodied but upright. His expression shifted from rage to curiosity. "You came alone." "I want my son safe," Grace said. "You want the chip? I have it. Let the boy go." Steele considered. Then he nodded once. "Deal." She handed over the drive. He gestured for a soldier to retrieve Eli, still inside the vault. "Release him," Steele ordered. But then an alert beeps from his comm. He looked at the drive. "This isn't it." Grace smiled. "Correct." The blast door slammed shut behind her. Inside, John hit enter. Upload complete. A ripple began in the airwaves. Across continents, cell phones buzzed with anonymous links. TVs glitched mid-commercials. Government servers blinked, froze, then rebooted with unfamiliar directories open. The world gasped. Screens filled with names, documents, assassination blueprints, surveillance programs run on children, private correspondences from senators and CEOs ordering deaths in sanitized language. Every lie is unspooled. In Times Square, billboards lit up with Steele's kill order signatures. In Berlin, subway screens displayed Helix's bribes. In Tokyo, classified drone strike footage rolled without sound, just blood and silence. Panic, fury, revolution, and at the center of it, Grace's voice. John had embedded a recording into the AI payload. Her voice, her story. "I was just a mother. They made me a threat. That's what truth does when people are afraid of it, so I stopped being afraid of them." The AI, reborn, called itself Hope, not coded to control or predict, but to remember. And as world leaders scrambled for damage control, Steele sat in the ruins of the safe house, surrounded by silence, his empire undone by a stranger he underestimated. Grace returned to the vault, cradling Eli, her hands trembling. John looked up from the monitors. "It's done," he said. She exhaled. "Then we fight for what's next." The safe house still smoked from the assault. The ceiling above the vault chamber hung in broken panels, cables sparking overhead like dying fireflies. Grace sat with Eli cradled beside her, his head in her lap. He'd slept through the last hour, the most dangerous and possibly the most historic hour of their lives. John slumped against the wall, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Nova worked quietly, checking the mesh networks for retaliation strikes, but the internet was aflame in all directions. Truth, now fully untethered, spread faster than damage control could contain it. And yet, Grace couldn't shake the weight in her chest. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "We lay low," John said. "Let the truth do what it was meant to do." "That's not enough," she said. John looked at her, confused. "We broke their machine, yes, but they'll build another, they always do. That's how power works. It evolves." She pulled out the real AI drive from her coat pocket, the one Steele never touched. The original version of Taurus pre-corruption. John's eyes widened. "You kept it?" Grace nodded. "Because I think we still need it, not just as a weapon, but as a shield." Nova approached, sensing the shift in energy. "You want to deploy it publicly?" she asked. "Let everyone have it?" "No," Grace replied. "I want to democratize access. Build a firewall out of truth, train citizens, whistleblowers, teachers. Put it in their hands, not governments. Let the people become the watchdogs." John stared at her, conflicted. "That could backfire. It's dangerous in untrained hands." Grace stood. So was every revolution. While the world reeled, one man refused to vanish quietly. Marcus Steele. He escaped the wreckage before the broadcast completed, disappearing into the underworld that had raised him. But his network had fractured, his funds frozen, and every ally marked. Still, he wasn't finished. 2 weeks after the leak, a private news outlet reported a break-in at a black site archive facility in Utah. An assassination server had been wiped clean. No suspects, no footage. John and Grace knew who it was. "He's rebuilding," John said bitterly. "Going dark, underground. That's how these things survive." Grace sat at their temporary safe house, a small lakeside cottage provided by Nova's people. She watched Eli playing in the shallow water, laughing as he skipped stones. "He won't stop," John added. "Neither will we," she said, and she meant it. That night, John received an encrypted message through a private channel. One only a handful of people in the world knew how to access. It contained 3 words. "We are waiting." No sender, no coordinates, just that message. John turned the screen toward Grace. "He's forming something new." "Let him," Grace said. "We're already ahead." She held up a tablet showing a new interface, HopeNet, a decentralized civic truth platform based on the Taurus framework. Open source, transparent, scalable, built for defense, not attack. "Now," she said, "we give the world a weapon he can't corrupt." The sun broke over the lake, casting golden lines through the trees. Eli ran ahead with his fishing rod, carefree again. Grace sat beside John on the deck, coffee in hand, silence between them not born of fear, but of peace. A rare thing. John studied her profile, strong, unwavering, changed. She was no longer just the woman who pulled him from the road. She was the one who had saved him. "You could walk away," he said quietly. "Take Eli, vanish, start over." Grace smiled. "Could, but I won't." "Why?" "Because you're not the only one with a past to answer for." John looked away. "I started all of this." Grace nodded. "And I chose to stand beside you anyway." A long pause. Then John reached into his coat and handed her a chip. Another one. Different. Sleeker. "This is a failsafe, a kill switch, for everything we built. If it ever turns on us or someone compromises HopeNet, this shuts it down permanently." Grace held the chip, heavy in her palm, her choice, her burden. She tucked it into a lockbox beneath the deck. "Then let's pray we never need it." John smiled faintly. "I already am." Behind them, the wind moved through the trees, quiet, steady, watching. The battle was over. The war had just begun. It started in whispers. A viral video of a senator denying involvement in clandestine drone strikes was immediately undercut by live footage of him in a war room approving the operation. His career ended before the press conference was over. Then came the boardroom leak. A Fortune 100 company's CEO caught on camera joking about exploiting disaster zones for profit. Within hours, workers across 3 continents went on strike. Soon it wasn't just whistleblowers, but teachers, journalists, medics, and students, all armed with access to HopeNet, the AI interface Grace and John had unleashed. Simple, intuitive. A tool not just to expose lies, but to validate truth. It wasn't just transparency, it was empowerment. A mother in Turkey used it to prove her son had been falsely imprisoned. A high schooler in Brazil revealed hidden environmental reports that stopped a mining company from destroying protected forests. In Kenya, a doctor used HopeNet to uncover fraudulent vaccine data that had been suppressing treatment access in rural clinics. The world was shifting, not cleanly, not without chaos, but undeniably. John watched the storm unfold from the small command center. Nova helped him build in Oregon. Monitors lined the walls, all blinking with activity, some hopeful, others frightening. "Some governments are calling this an information insurgency," Nova said, scrolling through digital headlines. The old guards pushing back. "Of course they are," John replied. "We just gave the people a sword." Grace walked in, brushing forest leaves off her jacket. She had just returned from a meetup in Portland, one of the first HopeNet community training hubs. "They're organizing," she said, setting down a satchel of printed materials. "Not just activists, ordinary people, grandmothers, veterans, students. They're learning how to use it, and they're teaching each other." John leaned back in his chair, exhausted but proud. Eli burst through the door behind her, waving a toy drone above his head. "Mom, I flew it without hitting a tree." Grace caught him mid-run, laughing. "So proud of you." John smiled, but that moment of joy was interrupted by a notification ping, a message from an anonymous node. Encrypted, urgent. Nova opened it. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Grace asked. Nova turned the screen around. "World Summit declares hope a global security risk. To vote on AI sanctions. They're trying to shut it down, Nova whispered. The truth is winning, so they're rewriting the rules. The summit resolution passed in less than 36 hours. It began with diplomatic language, emergency containment, ethical oversight, international stabilization measures. But the meaning was clear. Governments were afraid of what HopeNet could do. They weren't concerned with how it worked, only who controlled it. A multinational task force formed overnight. Sanction teams, AI monitors, censorship proxies masked as cyber protection agencies. Warrants were drafted for John's arrest in 8 countries. Grace's name was added in 3. Eli's passport was flagged. John stared at the screen, face tight. They're criminalizing the truth. Nova paced, her voice rising. We knew they'd come after us, but this fast. This coordinated question mark. Grace crossed her arms. Then we go underground, again. John shook his head. Running's not enough anymore. We need to fight back, on their level. How? Nova asked. They've labeled us rogue actors. John pulled up a digital map showing pockets of HopeNet usage worldwide, color-coded for volume and political resistance. We don't need to fight them with tech, he said. We fight them with stories, with people. We turn this network into a movement. Grace stepped forward. Then we do what they never expected. We go public. John blinked. Are you sure? She nodded. We built this for the people. Let's show them who we really are. 3 days later, Grace stood on a rooftop in San Francisco, facing a swarm of reporters. Drones buzzed in the air. Protests held signs in support of HopeNet. Across the street, corporate offices stood like cathedrals of the old world, silent, towering, watching. Grace adjusted the mic and cleared her throat. I'm not a hacker, she began. I'm not a politician. I'm not a radical. I'm a mother. I'm someone who opened her door to a stranger bleeding in the road and learned that truth isn't safe. It's dangerous, but it's worth it. She paused. The world doesn't need more secrets. It needs tools that give power back to people who've been told they have none. That's what HopeNet is, and no law written in fear will silence that. The crowd erupted. Hashtags trended globally. Grace's speech was streamed to over 400 million viewers within 12 hours. That night, she returned to the cottage. John stood on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the trees. You changed the game, he said. No, she replied, joining him. We did. Eli came out, rubbing his eyes. Is it over? He asked. Grace knelt. Not yet, but we're winning. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a war. It felt like a beginning. The cottage had become more than a hideout. It was now a nerve center, a place where revolution had taken root in the soil. Inside, Eli scribbled in a notebook, working on a story about a bear who saved a lost robot. Grace sat nearby, reading messages pouring in from around the world. Farmers in India using HopeNet to challenge corrupt land seizures. Nurses in Argentina exposing vaccine black market rings. Teachers in Sweden create curricula around digital truth literacy. HopeNet had gone viral, not just in code, but in principle. John returned from the nearby cabin, arms full of blueprints and server logs. We've got an offer, he said. A group of universities wants to host HopeNet's architecture, decentralized, independent. Think open source Wikipedia, but verified truth. Grace smiled. That's a step forward. It's more than that, he said, setting the files on the table. It's proof that the world doesn't want the old gatekeepers anymore. They spent hours working. Grace mapped educational tools. John coded updates. Eli asked endless questions. Each answer turned into an idea. Each idea became part of a larger dream. Eventually, Eli looked up from his paper. What should we name it? Grace glanced at John, then back at her son. You name it. Eli thought for a moment. Hope. The first sign came in fragments. An email sent to Nova's backup account, encrypted with a cipher she hadn't used since college. Inside was a single phrase, "The dead remember." Then a photo surfaced, grainy surveillance footage of a private auction in Dubai. One of the guests bore a striking resemblance to Marcus Steele. Grace and John reviewed the footage in silence. He's alive, she said. John nodded. And still playing the long game. Nova confirmed it. He's moving in the dark web again, building a syndicate of displaced operators and corrupt AI engineers. They're calling themselves the Whisper Protocol. John leaned back in his chair. Sounds poetic and dangerous. It gets worse, Nova added. They're trying to build their own AI. Grace's jaw tightened. Another Taurus? More like a mirror, Nova said. They're calling it Silhouette, designed to reshape facts, not expose them. John looked at the original kill switch Grace had hidden weeks ago, still untouched. Do we stop them now? Grace shook her head. We let HopeNet grow. We educate. We prepare. When Silhouette comes, we'll be ready. John hesitated. What if we're not? She looked out the window at the mountains. Then we fight like hell. Again. It was dusk. The last golden light melted into the horizon as Grace watched Eli fish from the dock, legs dangling just above the water. A breeze moved through the trees like a lullaby. Birds rustled in the canopy overhead, and somewhere nearby, a coyote howled once before silence returned. John joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. Stillness, he said, offering her one. For once, she replied, sipping it. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. HopeNet had survived its first global challenge. Servers distributed, leaders appointed from the ground up. No one is in charge, just protocols, principles, people, and Grace, once a tired, overworked mother who lived on the edge of financial collapse, had become something the world now looked to for guidance. Not a tech genius, not a savior, but a symbol of what happened when ordinary people chose to act. She looked at John. Do you think we'll ever have a real normal life? He thought about it, then smiled. I think this is normal now, and I'm okay with that. From inside, a chime sounded, a secure message. John opened it, a new node request. Attached was a name. Silhouette, first beta detected. Grace stood, brushing off her jacket. Well, she said, so much for peace. The sky darkened with storm clouds once again. It was almost poetic how things returned to the beginning. Grace sat alone at the kitchen table, sorting through encrypted messages. Most were positive. Support from grassroots journalists, small governments offering to help fund HopeNet expansions, and more stories from citizens holding their leaders accountable. But one message stood out. No signature, no traceable IP. Just a short, chilling line. Silhouette has entered the listening phase. We see you. She leaned back, jaw tight. Across from her, the envelope still lay unopened, one that had arrived earlier by post, hand-delivered with no return address. The handwriting was elegant, careful. Grace opened it. Inside, a flash drive. On its surface, a black insignia, a circle with a single diagonal slash. She called John immediately. He arrived within the hour, accompanied by Nova and 2 others from the HopeNet core team. They gathered in the basement, lights dimmed, comms shielded. John slotted the drive into an air-gapped terminal. The screen blinked once. Then a cascade of code appeared. A manifesto. Truth is not immutable. It is weaponized. It is owned. Let the world choose its own narrative. Silhouette. John stared in silence. It's not just an AI, he said. It's a philosophy. Nova swore under her breath. They've evolved it. It's a synthetic ideology, machine-curated misinformation built to act like truth. Worse, Grace added, it learns from resistance. Every time we fight it, it adapts. A file appeared at the bottom of the screen. Project Echo, target list, round 2. Grace scrolled down. Her name, John's, Nova's, and Eli's. No location, just confirmation. They had been marked. Grace closed the terminal and locked the drive away. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. We end it before it begins, she said. Whatever Silhouette is, we hunt it now. John nodded. Then we start again, but this time on offense. The wind howled over the ridge as night fell. From the mountaintop, Grace could see the lights of 4 towns. To anyone else, it would have been a quiet, unremarkable view, but Grace knew better. Below those lights were access hubs, satellites, listening posts. Pieces of the old world are still clawing for relevance, and now seeds of something new. Silhouette. John joined her on the overlook, coat flapping in the wind. He handed her a small pouch. Inside, a new drive. Hope 2.0, he said. Stronger architecture, post-quantum encryption, neural accountability engine. Grace raised an eyebrow. What's the catch? It needs a guardian, he replied. Someone who knows when to release it, when to protect it. Someone with judgment. She closed the pouch and tucked it inside her coat. I'll bury it, she said, just like the first one. Only this time I choose who gets access. John nodded. Below them, a set of headlights flickered along a distant road. Do you ever wonder, he asked, what happens when we stop? Grace looked at him, steady, unflinching. We don't, she said, because shadows never sleep, and neither do we. They turned back toward the path home, 2 figures lit only by the stars, walking not into peace, but into purpose. A revolution that would never end, but it always matters.